My son-in-law shoved me in my own kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon, and I didn't say a word. Not because I was afraid. Not because I was weak. I stayed quiet because I learned, the hard way, over 63 years of living, that silence can be a weapon sharper than anything you'd find in a drawer. His name is Colton. My daughter Angie married him 4 years ago in a backyard ceremony in Asheville, North Carolina, where I'd lived for the better part of 3 decades. She wore her mother's earrings. I cried. I thought I was gaining a son. I was wronged about a lot of things that day. My wife, Beverly Ann, passed from breast cancer 11 years ago. After that, it was just me and Angie. We were close in the way that people become close when they've survived a loss together. Quietly, without making a big deal out of it. She'd call me every Sunday morning. I'd drive up to see her in Raleigh every couple of months. We had a good thing. Then Colton came into the picture. He was charming at first. I'll give him that. Handsome in a practiced sort of way, the kind of man who always knew where the camera was. He worked in commercial real estate, talked fast, laughed louder than situations called for. Angie lit up around him, and I told myself that was enough. I kept my reservations to myself the way you do when your child's is an adult and your opinion wasn't asked. 6 months after the wedding, Colton called me. Not to chat, not to check in. He had a deal falling through and needed a bridge loan, $30,000, short term, 4 months tops. He'd pay me back with interest. He had paperwork, he said. It was practically guaranteed. Angie got on the phone too. She said it would mean so much to them. She said Colton was embarrassed to ask but had no one else to turn to. She said, "Dad, you're the only person we trust." I wired the money within the week. 4 months came and went. Then 6. Then a year. When I brought it up gently over Christmas dinner, Colton said the deal had restructured, the timeline had shifted, I'd have it by spring. He said it with such confidence that I almost believed him. Almost. Spring came. Nothing. I called him directly, that time. He said real estate moved in cycles. I knew that. Everyone knew that. And he'd appreciate it if I didn't put pressure on Angie about money. She had enough stress at work. I sat with that for a moment. Then I let it go, again. The second loan came 2 years later, $22,000. His car had been repossessed, a lease he'd defaulted on, and without reliable transportation he'd lose a major client. He framed it as a temporary embarrassment. He said the first loan would be folded into this one and repaid together. All of it. By year's end. I said no. That was the first time I said no to him, and it surprised me how difficult it was to say that single word to a man I didn't even like that much. But I said it. I told him I was still waiting on the first $30,000 and I wasn't in a position to extend more credit without a clear repayment plan in writing. He went quiet on the phone. A different kind of quiet than mine. Cold. Architectural. Okay, he said. I understand. He didn't understand. What he understood was that I'd drawn a line, and men like Colton don't respond well to lines. Things shifted after that. When I visited Raleigh, Colton was always busy, always just heading out the door or in the middle of something important. He'd give me a handshake instead of a hug. Angie seemed tense in a way she tried to hide, but couldn't quite pull off. She'd change the subject whenever money came up. She laughed too quickly at things that weren't funny. I noticed. I didn't push. Last October, I drove up to see them for Angie's birthday. I'd made a reservation at her favorite restaurant, a little Italian place off Glenwood Avenue she'd loved since college. I brought flowers. I showed up at their front door at 6:30, same as we planned. Colton answered the door. He was already in a mood. I could see it on his face the moment the door swung open. He'd been drinking. Not falling down drunk, but loose. The kind of loose that takes away the filter a man keeps between what he thinks and what he says. He told me the reservation had been canceled. His tone made it sound like my fault. I said that was fine. We could find somewhere else. I stepped inside. He moved to block the kitchen doorway. I'm not entirely sure why. It might have been instinct. It might have been performance. He said something about me always inserting myself, always showing up and making things about the money, always making Angie feel guilty. I told him calmly that I hadn't mentioned money once. He said I didn't have to. He said my presence was a reminder. He said Angie was finally in a good place emotionally, and I was going to undo all of it just by being there. I told him I'd come for my daughter's birthday. That was all. He shoved me then, both hands flat against my chest, not hard enough to knock me down, but hard enough to move me. Hard enough that I grabbed the door frame to keep my balance. Hard enough that it was unmistakably intentional. Angie appeared at the top of the stairs. She must have heard the voices. She looked at her husband, then at me, and I watched something cross her face. Something complicated. Something I didn't have a name for right then. I let go of the door frame. I straightened my jacket. I looked at Colton for a long moment, and I said, "I'll call you tomorrow, sweetheart," to Angie. Then I walked back to my car. I drove to a Cracker Barrel on I-40 and ate dinner alone. Pot roast and mashed potatoes. I had coffee afterward, and I sat there for a while watching the families at the other tables, and I thought about Beverly Ann and what she would have said about all of this. She always had a talent for cutting through to the center of a thing. She would have said, "Don't react, respond." There's a difference, she used to tell me. Reacting is emotional. Responding is intentional. She said her mother taught her that, and her mother's mother before that. I never forgot it. That night in the parking lot, I called my old attorney, a man named Fred Dawson who'd handled my estate planning and the sale of my woodworking business back in 2019. I left him a message. I told him I needed an appointment as soon as he could fit me in. I told him it was regarding a private family matter and potential civil action. Fred called me back the next morning at 8. I drove to his office in downtown Nashville that same afternoon. Now here's what most people don't know about me. I kept records of everything. Both loans. Every phone call about repayment, every text message where Colton acknowledged the debt and promised timelines. I had screenshots going back 3 years. I had the wire transfer confirmations, the dates, the amounts. I had a voicemail from 18 months ago where Colton said, and I'm paraphrasing, "I know what I owe you, and I'll make it right. I just need another couple of months." Fred looked at what I brought him and leaned back in his chair. "Gordon," he said, "my name is Gordon. Gordon Hale. You have a very clear civil case here. Documented loans with verbal repayment agreements, multiple acknowledgments of the debt on record. This isn't complicated." I asked him what my options were. He walked me through them. A demand letter first, formal, legal, giving Colton 30 days to repay the full amount or face a civil suit in small claims and potentially superior court, depending on how we structure the claim. $52,000 total, which crossed the threshold for small claims in North Carolina, meaning we'd be looking at district court. I asked him to draft the letter. He also asked if I considered the broader picture, meaning Angie, meaning the marriage, meaning what a legal action against my son-in-law would do to my relationship with my daughter. He asked it gently, the way Fred always does things, like he's handing you something fragile. I told him I'd thought about it for a long time. I told him I wasn't trying to blow up my daughter's marriage. I was trying to give her husband one last opportunity to be a man about what he owed. If Colton paid the money, the letter would never need to go further. If he didn't, then the truth would come out in a courtroom, and Angie would have to decide what she wanted to do with that information. Either way, I was done absorbing the cost of his decisions. Fred nodded. He drafted the letter that week. I drove to Raleigh on a Saturday morning, 11 days after my birthday visit. I didn't call ahead. I pulled up to the house at 10 a.m. and Angie answered the door in her bathrobe looking surprised. I told her I just wanted to see her, give her a belated birthday card, say hello. She let me in. Colton was in the living room watching college football. He looked up, and I watched the calculation move across his face. What was I doing here? What did I want? Was I going to make a scene? I sat down. We made small talk. Angie made coffee. I asked about her job. She works as a speech pathologist for a school district in Wake County, and I listened to her talk about the kids she works with. And for 20 minutes, it was almost like things used to be. Then I reached into my jacket pocket, and I put the envelope on the coffee table. Colton looked at it. Legal-sized, sealed, his name on the front in Fred's assistant's neat handwriting. Angie asked what it was. I said it was something I'd been meaning to give Colton for a while. I said it was best if he opened it when he had a quiet moment. Colton picked it up. He turned it over in his hands. I watched him processing it, trying to read the envelope like it might give something away. I think he thought it was a check. I think, in that moment, he decided I'd come around, that the shove in the kitchen had been the thing that finally broke me, that I'd weighed the cost of losing Angie against the money and decided the money wasn't worth it. He smiled. Not at me, just to himself, the small, private smile of a man who believes he's won something. "I'll look at it later," he said. "Sure," I said. I finished my coffee. I hugged Angie. I told her I loved her, and I meant it completely and without complication, the way I always have. Then I drove home. Fred told me later that Colton opened the letter that same afternoon, based on when his office received the call. Colton called the number on the letterhead, Fred's direct line, at 2:47 p.m. Fred's paralegal said he was loud at first, demanding to know what this was, calling it harassment, threatening to report Fred to the state bar. Fred called him back personally. He explained, calmly, that the letter was not harassment. It was a formal demand for repayment of documented loans totaling $52,000. It outlined the legal basis for the claim, the evidence already in hand, and the 30-day window for resolution before the matter would be filed in Wake County District Court. Colton went quiet. Fred said you could almost hear the realization landing. 3 days later, Angie called me. It was a Sunday, her usual time, but the call felt different from the first word. Her voice was careful in a way I recognized. She was working something out in real time, trying to find the path between what she felt and what she was allowed to say. She asked me why I'd done it this way, why I hadn't come to her first. I told her I'd tried, over 3 years, to handle it between Colton and me. I told her I'd mentioned the money gently, then directly, and been put off every time. I told her I'd said no to the second loan and watched things get colder between us ever since. I told her about the shove. She was quiet for a long time. "I didn't know he pushed you," she said. I told her I hadn't wanted to make her choose that night. That wasn't why I'd driven up. I'd driven up to take my daughter to dinner for her birthday. She cried then, not the loud, dramatic kind, but quiet kind, the kind that means something real is breaking or being repaired, and you can't yet tell which. I told her I loved her. I told her that wasn't in question, not for a single second. I told her I had spent the last 4 years trying to be the kind of father who didn't make her marriage harder, who gave her husband room to be the man she believed he was. I told her I thought she deserved the truth about what that man actually was. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "I know." 2 weeks later, Angie called to tell me she'd spoken with a divorce attorney. Not that she'd decided anything, she was careful about that. But she'd spoken with someone. She'd started asking questions. She'd started looking at things clearly. She asked if she could come stay with me for a few days. She drove down on a Friday evening, and we sat on my back porch with the heat lamps going, and I grilled chicken thighs the way I used to when she was in high school. We talked until almost midnight. About her mother. About what she'd noticed over the years, but explained away about the particular loneliness of being married to someone and feeling more alone than you'd felt when you were single. She cried again that night, but this time it was different. This time she was the one who said, "I think I've known for a while." I didn't say I told you so. That was never the point. The civil case was never filed. On the 28th day of the 30-day window, Colton's attorney contacted Fred's office with a repayment proposal. $40,000 within 60 days, and the remaining $12,000 in monthly installments over the following year. Fred brought it to me. I accepted. Not because I forgave him. I'm not sure I'll ever fully forgive a man who put his hands on me and smiled about a letter he assumed was a check. But I accepted because the goal was never to destroy him. The goal was to establish, in terms he couldn't dismiss, that I was not someone he could keep taking from. The first payment arrived on a Tuesday morning. Direct deposit, just like the money I'd sent him 4 years earlier. I sat at my kitchen table looking at the deposit notification on my phone for a long minute. I thought about what Beverly Ann would have said. She would have said, "See, you responded. You didn't react." She would have been right. Angie filed for divorce 6 weeks after that Friday night on my porch. The process is ongoing. These things take time in North Carolina, especially when property is involved and both parties have attorneys. She's staying in the house for now. She calls me every Sunday, same as she always has. Last month, she drove down for a weekend, and we went to the farmer's market on the river the way we used to when she was in college. She bought peaches and some kind of artisanal honey and a small potted rosemary plant she wanted for her kitchen. We got coffee from the stand by the parking lot and walked along the water in the November cold, and she put her arm through mine the way she used to when she was a teenager, and I was the person she walked beside without needing to explain anything. I'm 63 years old. I lost my wife too early. I built a business with my hands, sold it, and learned to fill my days differently. I am not a man who raises his voice often or wastes energy on anger he can't do anything with. But I am also not a man you can shove in his own kitchen and expect to stay quiet forever. My daughter knows that now. I think, in some part of her she always did. She just needed time to see it clearly, and I needed patience enough to give her that time, without forcing the choice before she was ready to make it. The rosemary plant is sitting on her kitchen windowsill in Raleigh right now. She sent me a picture of it last week. Green and healthy, she said. Growing well. That's enough for me. I keep coming back to that drive home on Angie's birthday. The Cracker Barrel on I-40. The pot roast going cold on the plate. The families around me that didn't know what had just happened. 20 minutes up the road. There was no dramatic music. No moment of clarity wrapped up in a neat little bow. Just an old man sitting alone with a cup of coffee, trying to figure out what kind of person he was going to be from that point forward. What I've come to understand is that the choices Colton made didn't start with the shove. They started years earlier. The first time he borrowed money he never intended to repay. The first time he blamed his problems on everyone around him, instead of looking inward. Actions like that don't appear out of nowhere. They build. And what gets built eventually has to come down, one way or another. I didn't cause that collapse. I just stopped holding the structure up. Beverly Ann used to say that integrity isn't what you do when people are watching. It's what you do when no one would ever know the difference. I thought about that a lot during the months I kept quiet about the loans, kept the peace, kept telling myself it wasn't the right time. The truth is, I was doing the comfortable thing and calling it patience. Real patience isn't passive. Real patience is knowing when to wait, and knowing just as clearly when waiting has become an excuse. That's the thing about being the kind of man who keeps records. People might read that as cold calculated even, but I kept those records because somewhere in me, even before I admitted it consciously, I knew that the truth would matter eventually. I knew that there would come a day when I'd need something more than my word against his. That wasn't cynicism. That was the accumulated intelligence of living long enough to understand how people like Colton operate and refusing to be naive about it a second time. The hard part wasn't confronting him. The hard part was confronting myself. Asking honestly whether I'd let things go on so long because I was protecting Angie, or because I was protecting my own image of myself as someone who doesn't make waves. Both things can be true at once, and I think they were. What I know is this. The moment I stopped absorbing his behavior to keep the peace, Angie got the space she needed to see clearly. I didn't tell her what to think. I didn't force a choice. I just stopped pretending. And the truth did the rest. That's not a small thing. That took more out of me than any of the money ever did. At 63, I don't have unlimited runway. I'm not going to spend what's left of it carrying weight that doesn't belong to me. That rosemary plant on Angie's windowsill, green and growing, she said, that's what I'm after. Small, specific, alive. That's enough.